In the 4th year of my pursuit of Jasper Ainsworth, my family went bankrupt. His true love seized the opportunity and said, "It's a good chance to teach her a lesson and temper her spoiled nature." Heeding her words, Jasper abandoned me on a foreign street. 4 months later, I returned to Capital City, battered and bruised. Everyone thought I would continue to cling to Jasper, refusing to let go. Instead, I actively avoided him and returned his gifts, severing all ties completely. Jasper joked with his friends, "I've finally shaken off that leech." But on the day I left Capital City, he chased me to the airport in a daze, trembling as he begged, "Olivia, please stay. Can't we go back to how we were before?" I smiled, my eyes crinkling, and pointed to my slightly swollen belly. "Jasper Ainsworth, look. How can we possibly go back to how we were before?" Ding! This novel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. The day I returned to Capital City, battered and bruised, Jasper's assistant picked me up from the airport. When I arrived, the atmosphere in the private room was lively. As I approached, I heard Jasper's voice. "Olivia seems to have improved, looking much more well-behaved now. It's about time her delicate nature was tempered a bit. Miss Johnson is right. Now that Olivia's family is bankrupt, she's no longer a little princess. Who would still indulge her if she acted as spoiled as before? It's just a pity for Jasper, she'll cling to you even more now." Jasper let out a mocking laugh. "Don't I know it? She's like a bloody leech." Just as he finished speaking, I pushed open the door and entered. The previously jovial group suddenly fell silent. I saw shock, surprise, and disbelief in their eyes. The dazzling, spoiled little rich girl from 4 months ago was now haggard, thin, like a refugee who had just escaped hell. The always graceful and proper Miss Johnson spoke up with concern. "Olivia, what's happened to you? Come in quickly." But I stood still, not moving. I also didn't react as I used to, seeing Miss Johnson sitting next to Jasper. In the past, I would have immediately shown my displeasure on my face. Then, provoked by a few words from Miss Johnson, I'd cry in anger and have a big row with Jasper. The pleasant gathering would always end on a sour note, causing many people to dislike me. Thinking of this now, I found it laughable. "What are you standing there for? Come in already." Jasper frowned at me, his expression one of contempt and impatience that I knew all too well. I lowered my gaze and smiled faintly. "Jasper, thank you for sending your assistant to pick me up at the airport." "Olivia? I came here today to return this to you." I took out a small box from my coat pocket and handed it to him. It was an ordinary luxury brand necklace. It was also the only birthday gift Jasper had ever given me in all these years. I loved it and cherished it, only daring to wear it on my birthday. But now, I didn't want it anymore. Jasper didn't take it. He sat there with a cold expression, his lips pressed tightly together. I hesitated for a moment, then placed the box on a nearby table. "Olivia, your hands." The girl closest to me let out a small gasp. Jasper's gaze immediately fell on my hands. The back of my hands were covered in cracked scars, and my once delicate fingertips were now riddled with blood blisters. They had hardened into scabs, twisted and deformed, unsightly to behold. I pulled my hands back into my sleeves and looked up at Jasper again. "Jasper Ainsworth, there's one last thing I came here for today." "What is it?" His voice was cold enough to make one's heart tremble. "All these years of clinging to you, it must have been annoying, right?" I smiled apologetically at him. In the past, I was immature and too willful. "I apologize to you. It won't happen again." After saying this, I didn't linger any longer and turned to leave. As I was walking out of the room, Jasper called out to me. "Olivia Robinson, you'd better keep your word. Don't lie and end up contradicting yourself." My steps faltered for a moment, but I didn't turn back. All right. The night disaster struck my family, I was still abroad. My father, who loved me the most, couldn't be saved. Not long after, my mother liquidated all our assets and went straight to America to stay with my uncle. All she left me was this small flat. I don't resent her for abandoning me, rather, I'm grateful she didn't leave me homeless. This bed is small, but it's infinitely better than cramming into a basement with 7 or 8 others overseas. I've had the best, most peaceful sleep in 4 months. Until the doorbell woke me up. I was surprised to see Jasper Ainsworth through the peephole, but then I remembered he also owned a flat here. I opened the door and, before he could speak, I said, "I'm sorry, I'll move out right away. I'll list this flat with an estate agent to sell." "Olivia, what do you mean?" Perhaps it was my imagination, but Jasper's expression turned incredibly sour after I said those words. "I'll move out today. I promise you won't see me again." I finished speaking and reached for my phone to contact an estate agent. Just as the call connected, Jasper suddenly snatched the phone and smashed it violently on the ground. "Playing hard to get? You've been at it for 4 years. Haven't you had enough? Selling the flat and moving out? Then ending up on the streets in the middle of the night, calling me in tears for help? So you can conveniently move in with me, is that it? Olivia Robinson, can't you grow up? Can't you stop with these tricks?" I looked at the shattered phone on the floor, feeling a pang of regret. For those months, even having enough to eat was a luxury. This phone was a second-hand one my former boss had given me out of pity when I returned to the country. I crouched down, trying to pick up the pieces. Jasper took out his wallet and tossed it to me. "Go buy a new one. I'll compensate you. So you won't have an excuse to cling to me again." He slammed the door as he left. I looked at the wallet on the floor, and as I smiled, tears began to fall. In the end, I still bought the cheapest phone I could find. He was right, it's best if we owe each other nothing. I called Assistant Wilson, asking him to come and collect Jasper's wallet. "Miss Robinson, I'm truly sorry, but I can't get away right now. Would it be possible for you to bring the wallet to the office?" I thought for a moment. "All right, I'll bring it over shortly." Assistant Wilson hung up the phone and looked towards Jasper Ainsworth, who was standing by the floor-to-ceiling window. Although he didn't quite understand why Jasper had instructed him to speak that way, he could vaguely sense that Mr. Ainsworth didn't seem to dislike Miss Robinson as much as he thought. "Did you buy the medicine?" "Yes, it's all here." Assistant Wilson quickly handed over the paper bag. It contained medicines for treating external injuries and removing scars, clearly prepared for Miss Robinson. Jasper nodded. "You may go now." About 40 minutes later, the reception desk called the secretary's office. Assistant Wilson knocked and entered cautiously. "Mr. Ainsworth, Miss Robinson has sent something via same-day delivery." Before he could finish speaking, the jade paperweight on the desk was suddenly smashed violently onto the floor. Assistant Wilson lowered his head, not daring to breathe. A moment later, Jasper chuckled. "Well, a few months apart and she's really grown bold. After listing the house with an estate agent, I temporarily moved into a cheap hotel." Jasper didn't contact me again. Instead, he started appearing in public with Lorraine, which was quite out of character for him. People kept calling me. "Olivia, have you and Jasper had a falling out? Is Lorraine going to marry Jasper? I heard they were looking at engagement rings yesterday." I didn't respond to any of it. I just looked at my slightly swollen belly in the mirror and called the estate agent again, lowering the house price by $50,000. I wanted to leave Capital City as soon as possible, to leave this place forever and never come back. The baby in my womb was an unexpected surprise. By the time I realized, he was already 3 months along. The doctor said the fetus was fully formed, developing very well, with tiny hands and feet. As I lay there, tears suddenly welled up in my eyes. After much deliberation, I still decided to terminate the pregnancy. But perhaps it was fate. When I was preparing for the procedure, some kind of unrest broke out nearby. There was a distant explosion, and then the whole hospital lost power. This child somehow managed to stay. I consoled myself that at least his father was a handsome man. Jasper Ainsworth had abandoned me in that turbulent foreign country. What disasters might befall a young, beautiful single woman was obvious. Would I end up sold to a red-light district as the lowest prostitute, eventually dying of disease? Or should I go with a man? When I cried out for help, I had already accepted whatever fate had in store for me next. And when he reached out to help me, the trajectory of my destiny had already completely changed course. The biological father of the baby in my womb. He was that conscientious, unbelievably handsome and wealthy man. At least it was better than Jasper Ainsworth. Perhaps this was fate showing me a glimmer of mercy and kindness. The day I sold the house, I received a call from Lorraine Johnson. "Olivia, I've decided to accept Jasper's proposal. Congratulations to you both. I hope you can come to the engagement party. Would that be all right?" "I'm sorry, I can't." "You still can't let go, can you, Olivia?" Lorraine's voice was gentle, as if she pitied me. "Some things just can't be forced. But you're smarter now than before, knowing to take a step back to move forward. However, it's useless, Olivia. Jasper only listens to me, and I'm the only one in his heart. You see, with just one word from me, he dropped you." "Lorraine, what exactly are you trying to say?" There was a moment of silence on the other end of the line. "Olivia Robinson, I've decided to go back to him, so I want to make it clear to you, stop clinging to Jasper." "Have I been clinging? Don't think I don't know what you're planning. You love him so much, how could you possibly let go? Especially now that your family's bankrupt. If he only has you in his heart and only listens to you, what are you afraid of?" Lorraine didn't speak for a long time, so I hung up the phone. A few seconds later, I received a voice message. Jasper Ainsworth's voice was lazy and disdainful. "Finally got rid of that leech. I've never felt so free and relaxed in my life. Congratulations, Mr. Ainsworth, on regaining your freedom, haha." I smiled and turned off my phone. The day I left Capital City was gloomy, with heavy smog hanging in the air. I got out of the taxi with my suitcase and walked into the airport terminal. Suddenly, I heard the roar of an engine in the distance. Instinctively, I turned around. That all-too-familiar car was speeding towards me. I gripped the handle of my suitcase tightly and turned to walk away. "Olivia!" Jasper Ainsworth jumped out of the car and caught up to me in a few strides. "Olivia!" His voice trembled as he grabbed my arm. "Where are you going?" I looked at him calmly. "Jasper, let go." His eyes were rimmed with red, and he looked utterly lost. "Olivia, please stay. Can't we go back to the way things were?" I released my grip on the suitcase. Taking a step back, I slowly unbuttoned my coat. The winter wind in Capital City was bitterly cold, chilling me to the bone in an instant. My waist was still slender, but there was a slight swell to my belly. Jasper's gaze slid down inch by inch, finally freezing on that spot. I smiled at him, my eyes crinkling. "Look, Jasper. How can we possibly go back to the way things were?" The wind that had been howling moments ago seemed to have been suddenly paused. Jasper Ainsworth stood there, motionless for who knows how long. Finally, he slowly raised his bloodshot eyes to look at me. "Olivia, why did it turn out like this?" I pulled my coat tighter, raising a hand to smooth my wind-tousled hair. "You're asking me?" I laughed calmly. "Isn't this exactly what you wanted?" "It's not like that, Olivia. I did leave you there, but Lorraine said she had relative in the area. She said she'd already asked someone to pick you up. She said you were too delicate and sheltered, unaware of life's hardships. How could you ever marry with such a personality?" I was so annoyed by your clinginess at the time, I agreed without thinking. "But I never meant to harm you. I just wanted you to experience some hardship so you wouldn't cling to me after returning home." "Olivia, didn't Lorraine's relative come to get you?" The smile on my face gradually faded in the biting wind. "He came." Jasper suddenly let out a sigh of relief. "I knew it. Lorraine always handles things generously and thoroughly. But do you know what her relative does for a living?" Jasper froze. "Olivia?" "Organized crime, smuggling, every evil under the sun." I stared blankly at Jasper, my hollow pupils reflecting his dumbfounded, laughable expression. I nearly died trying to escape from him. I lost my ID, phone, wallet, everything. I was so hungry I had to fight beggars for food. I slept under bridges at night and nearly got raped several times. In the end, I was targeted again, about to be sold to the red light district. I had cried all my tears dry in those 4 months. But perhaps it was the fierce, cold wind at that moment, my eyes stung unbearably. The only one who reached out to help me then was him. the biological father of the child in my womb. Stop. Olivia, stop talking. Jasper's face was etched with pain. He stepped forward, grasping my wrist. I'll take you to the hospital, Olivia. We can't keep this child of unknown origin. Why not? He couldn't meet my eyes, his voice low and hoarse. If you get rid of the baby, we can pretend none of this ever happened. Olivia, I'll treat you well. Your mom's gone to America. You have no other relatives here. Stay with me. I'll take care of you from now on. Jasper Ainsworth. I forcefully shook off his hand. Olivia, don't be foolish. No one else knows about your pregnancy. I'll arrange a private hospital. You can terminate the pregnancy, and I'll keep it confidential. Your reputation won't be affected at all. And then what? I deliberately asked him. Will you marry me? Jasper Ainsworth was visibly taken aback. He lowered his gaze, his lips tightly pressed together, as if struggling with a decision for a long time before finally making up his mind. Olivia, given your family's current situation, your elders would never approve. But don't worry, I won't abandon you. I'll take care of you for the rest of your life. Jasper Ainsworth, I called his name softly. Even as he looked up at me, I managed a faint smile. Do you know what I'm most grateful for right now? What is it? I'm grateful that we never became intimate. I'm grateful that the child in my womb isn't yours. Olivia. The look in Jasper's eyes betrayed his panic. I took 2 steps back. Don't come looking for me again. Don't make me regret ever having feelings for someone like you. I grabbed my suitcase and turned to leave. Jasper, however, chased after me. Olivia, where can you go in your current state? You've been sheltered all your life. How will you survive outside Capital City, away from me? I whirled around abruptly, releasing my grip on the suitcase. I held out my battered hands in front of Jasper. With these hands, Olivia won't starve. Jasper Ainsworth's eyes were glazed over, his entire body shaking violently. I had never seen him like this before. In our social circle, he was always the most playful and carefree one. Wherever he went, he was the most arrogant and rebellious young gentleman. In my naive youth, I had prayed countless times in secret. I prayed that Jasper would like me, treat me a little better. I prayed that Lorraine Johnson would stay far away from Jasper, never to return and complicate our relationship. I prayed that I could marry Jasper. If only he would smile at me one day, or show me a slightly kinder attitude. I would forget all the hurt and tears, and continue to revolve around him adoringly. Tirelessly, relentlessly. Now, he had finally started to care about me. He had begun to beg me not to leave. At last, I existed in his eyes. But I found it laughable, and felt nothing but disgust and revulsion. Olivia. Jasper tried to hold my hand. But just as he was about to touch me, he stopped. His hands were those of a privileged young gentleman. Once, my hands were like that too. But now, with twisted knuckles and covered in scars, the blood blisters had turned into ugly calluses. They weren't pretty anymore, but they were stronger. It turns out that a flower raised in a greenhouse, when removed from that protected environment, doesn't necessarily have only one path: death. As I dragged my suitcase into the airport terminal, I suddenly felt a discomfort in my lower abdomen. Perhaps it was due to the intense emotional turmoil from the recent argument. Or maybe my body had finally reached its limit after days of exhaustion. When a warm flow surged out, my vision began to spin. I suddenly collapsed softly to the ground. In my last moments of consciousness, I heard many voices calling my name, all blending into chaos. But soon, all the sounds vanished, leaving only a deathly silence. When I opened my eyes again, I was greeted by a blinding whiteness. The smell of disinfectant filled my nostrils. The machines beside me beeped rhythmically. I instinctively tried to reach for my belly, but a soft hand gently stopped me. Don't worry, Miss Robinson, the baby is fine. Who are you? I stared blankly at the middle-aged woman before me. She had unremarkable features but kind eyes. Her clothes were oddly styled, and her English had a strange accent. I had a vague feeling that I'd seen her somewhere before, but couldn't quite place it. Mr. Richardson has been informed. He's on a flight to the mainland now, the woman said as she tucked in my blanket. Would you like some water? I nodded, my foggy brain slowly clearing. Mr. Richardson. Could it be him? But we had agreed never to see each other again, to have no further connection. Of course. My pregnancy had inadvertently broken that rule. I didn't know Mr. Richardson's identity or background. But just from his attire and daily expenses, I could guess that his background and origins were unfathomable. That morning, when he was dressing to leave, he had casually asked if I wanted to stay with him. In my circumstances, following him would have been the best option, but I refused. I didn't want to be a despised parasite anymore. He didn't force me after my refusal. He even offered me money, which I didn't take. He had saved my life, and I had spent a night with him. We were even. For 3 months after that, I never saw him again. Instead, I endured countless hardships. I learned how to make a living, how to budget carefully. I also learned to read people and situations, no longer being naive and spoiled. In my lowest moments, I cried and regretted. When I was too exhausted to even crawl, I even thought about going back to Jasper Ainsworth. But in the end, I gritted my teeth and persevered. Relying on a man once means being inferior for life. The Robinson family had gone bankrupt. I was no longer a rich young lady. If I went back still acting like a princess, I'd probably have to depend on others to survive for the rest of my life. But I didn't want to live that kind of life anymore. After the housekeeper made sure I had some water and food, I dozed off again. This sleep was restless, and towards the end, I even dreamed of Mr. Richardson. He was sitting casually on the sofa in the living room, lighting a cigar with a torch lighter. I was brought in by a servant and stood there for quite a while. He finally looked up at me. Olivia. Mr. Richardson. He had a pair of cold, indifferent eyes. When he looked at people, it was as if there was always an impenetrable fog between them. Even though he was right in front of me, it felt like we were separated by vast distances. In the dream, after he called my name, he didn't speak again. Until he finished that cigar. The back of my shirt was soaked through. In the dream, my belly had grown somewhat. But my body was still very weak, and I could barely stand for long. Just as I was about to collapse, he finally spoke slowly. Who gave you the audacity to secretly carry my child? Mr. Richardson, I didn't. I took all the medicine you prepared. You can check the security footage if you don't believe me. I frantically tried to explain, but he seemed not to believe a word. He just waved his hand tiredly, signaling the bodyguards to drag me out. Mr. Richardson, please don't. I cried out begging him, and suddenly woke up from the dream in tears. As I opened my eyes groggily, I was still calling out Mr. Richardson repeatedly. What nightmare did you have? Crying like a child. Through my blurry vision, I saw a handsome man's face. He had completely Eastern features, but with amber-colored eyes. His English had a slight accent, but his deep voice was particularly pleasant. He wore a black bespoke suit with peaked lapels, sitting by my bedside. He was using a handkerchief to wipe away the tears I had cried in my dream. The scene was bizarre, yet strangely harmonious. I stared at him blankly, forgetting to cry. Mr. Richardson? It's me, he replied softly, setting aside the damp handkerchief. I came to my senses and anxiously tried to sit up. Dennis Richardson, however, gently pressed me back down. Don't sit up. Disregarding everything else, I hurriedly explained, Mr. Richardson. I took all the medication you left that day. You can ask the housekeepers or check the security cameras. I don't know why I still got pregnant. When I found out about the pregnancy, I went to the hospital immediately. But there was a bomb threat, and the entire hospital lost power, so the procedure couldn't be done. I knew that for a man of Dennis Richardson's status and position, it was best not to tell even a single lie. Now you can have the hospital arrange the procedure right away. If you're not at ease, you can personally wait until it's finished. Olivia Robinson, he suddenly spoke. Just like in my dream, he called my name in a clear yet deep voice. Only in the dream, his tone carried a weary impatience. But now, it was gentle. I'm a Buddhist. I don't take life. Dennis Richardson paused here, his gaze falling on my face once more. Those cold, indifferent eyes now held a faint tenderness, matching his gentle tone. Moreover, he is my flesh and blood. He leaned in slightly, his long fingers brushing away the damp hair on my forehead. Rest well, and don't overthink things. Mr. Richardson? He withdrew his hand and stood up straight, looking at me. Those eyes, seemingly forever devoid of joy or sorrow, showed no emotion. Unless you truly don't want him. On the day I was discharged from the hospital, Dennis Richardson asked me the same question for the second time. Olivia Robinson, will you come with me? But this time, I didn't give a quick answer like I did before. He was wearing a sleek black coat, with bodyguards and assistants behind him. Although he appeared to have gentle eyes and a calm demeanor, even speaking unhurriedly and always composed, his mere presence instilled fear in others. I was no longer the naive and simple-minded Olivia Robinson the first once was. Going with him would undoubtedly mean a life of luxury and financial security. But it would also mean a life like a caged bird or a puppet on strings. Yet when he looked at me like that, with those clear and gentle eyes, I couldn't help but entertain foolish hopes. As if his question carried a hint of sincerity. It took me a while to finally utter my refusal. Mr. Richardson, I'm very grateful to you, I said. But I'm truly sorry, I can't go with you. The moment I spoke, I felt the air around us grow still. The crowd of people standing behind him held their breath, eyes lowered. Not even their breathing could be heard. I grew nervous too, my palms becoming clammy. Very well, Dennis Richardson's voice broke the unbearable silence. His expression remained unchanged, still unreadable. It's been hard for you, he said. I quickly shook my head. No, it hasn't. You don't need to worry about me. Dennis Richardson gave a slight nod. Do you have enough money? Yes, I do. If you have any difficulties, remember to come to me. Olivia, I mean what I say. I hastily replied, Mr. Richardson, I will. I won't do anything foolish. Good. Dennis Richardson gave me one last look before turning to get into his car. I watched the car drive away until it was out of sight. Only then did I gently touch my belly and slowly let out a deep breath. The car had been driving away from the hospital for a while. Dennis Richardson, who had been silent all this time, suddenly spoke up. Kristen, do I look frightening? Mr. Richardson, there's no one in this world more gentle than you. Why would you ask such a question? Kristen replied. She seemed to be very afraid of me. Kristen paused for a moment, then tried to explain, Miss Robinson just doesn't know you well yet. After all, you haven't spent much time together. But Dennis Richardson didn't seem to have heard Kristen's answer. He looked out the car window, his long fingers twirling the sandalwood beads on his wrist. As if talking to himself, he murmured, We even have a baby, she still doesn't want to be with me. Kristen fell silent, not knowing how to respond. That day when Miss Robinson cried out for help, he thought Mr. Richardson had only acted out of kindness to save her. Even when he brought her home, Kristen didn't think much of it. Mr. Richardson had lived alone for so many years. Not only was the old lady of the Richardson family nearly going mad with worry, even the staff around him felt sorry for him. But unexpectedly, the young lady would rather go out and suffer than stay. Kristen himself came from a humble background. But in those days, watching Miss Robinson struggle in the slums, working her fingers to the bone for 3 meals a day, even he was moved. Miss Robinson was born into luxury, probably never having washed a single dish in her life. Yet she could endure such hardship and toil. How could one not admire her? Perhaps it was precisely Miss Robinson's tenacity and stubbornness that made Mr. Richardson care even more. He had people secretly protect her all along, and even sent his most trusted person to accompany her back to the country. Later, when the news came that Miss Robinson almost had a miscarriage, Mr. Richardson walked straight out of a negotiation. Everyone witnessed his rushed journey back. Even Kristen thought that the Richardson family would soon have a new mistress. Unexpectedly, Miss Robinson still refused to go. Kristen wanted to try to offer some comfort, but he was too tongue-tied to say anything. However, looking at the silent Mr. Richardson, Kristen felt distressed as well. Sir, if it doesn't work out, shall I go and kidnap Miss Robinson? Kristen suggested. Dennis Richardson looked up at Kristen. Kristen, no one is to touch her. But, sir. Kristen became anxious, almost forgetting his place. If this is what she wants, let her be happy. Sir. Don't say any more. Dennis Richardson closed his eyes, and Kristen could only reluctantly shut his mouth. As I was leaving the hospital, I suddenly received a call from Caden Harvey. There were many people in our circle who disliked me. But Caden Harvey was decent enough to me. He was a few years older and would often look out for me. Although Jasper Ainsworth and I had already fallen out, I still addressed Caden as I used to. Caden, did you need something? Olivia, are you free to come over right now? He asked. I paused for a moment. Caden, if there's something, you can just tell me over the phone. Jasper got into a fight with Lorraine. He hit her. I was rather surprised. After all, for so many years, Lorraine had been like a goddess to Jasper Ainsworth. Now that he was about to marry her, how could he suddenly bring himself to hit her? Lorraine is crying and threatening to jump off the building. Jasper can't stop her. Caden, what could I possibly do if I went there? Jasper is forcing Lorraine to apologize to you in person. I couldn't help but laugh. That really isn't necessary. Lorraine was wrong to add fuel to the fire, but who was the real culprit here? Moreover, if I hadn't been so persistent for 4 years, annoying everyone, how could such a disaster have occurred? Olivia, actually, Jasper still has feelings for you. Caden, please don't say any more. Such words now sounded so absurd it made me sick. If there's nothing else, I'll hang up now. Olivia. I ended the call. I felt utterly exhausted, both physically and mentally. I had wanted to leave town that night, but my body couldn't take it. The doctor had also said I needed to come to the hospital weekly for checkups to maintain the pregnancy. After some thought, I decided to book a cheap hotel near the hospital. Just as I finished booking, Caden sent me a text message. Olivia, Jasper is hurt. It's quite serious. The photo showed Jasper slumped on a sofa, clutching his forehead. Blood was gushing through his fingers, covering half his face. In the past, I would have cried my eyes out with worry. I would have rushed to his side without a second thought. But now, I calmly replied, "Take him to the hospital then. It does look serious." Olivia, Jasper refuses to go. I didn't reply again. A moment later, I received a call from an unknown number. I had a hunch who it might be, so I didn't answer. After that, my phone fell silent. After returning to the hotel, I quickly freshened up and went to bed. The next day, I didn't open my eyes until 9 o'clock. There were a few messages on my phone. They were sent by Lorraine Johnson at 2 in the morning. Olivia Robinson, are you satisfied now? Jasper Ainsworth won't marry me anymore, and it's all because of you. I will personally return that slap to you. I just thought this person was seriously ill. If we were to settle accounts, how many slaps would Lorraine Johnson deserve? I simply blocked all these numbers. I didn't even spare Caden Harvey's. However, when I went to the hospital for another checkup, I encountered Jasper Ainsworth again. He seemed to be waiting for me there on purpose. Meeting face to face, I didn't avoid him. I nodded to him and walked towards the lift. Jasper Ainsworth had bandages wrapped around his head, looking quite disheveled. He didn't say anything, just silently followed behind me. Registration, examination, collecting medicine. I was a bit tired and sat down on a long bench to rest. Jasper Ainsworth looked at me several times, seemingly wanting to speak but hesitating. After a while, he finally called out to me. Olivia, that man doesn't want you and the baby, does he? That's between him and me. Jasper Ainsworth stared at me blankly, as if he had made a big decision. Olivia, be with me. I'll help you raise the child in your womb. I originally didn't want to waste a single word on him. But hearing his words now, I couldn't help but laugh bitterly. I looked up at him. Jasper Ainsworth, what exactly do you mean by that? I saw everything that day, Olivia. You were taken to the hospital by those people. I couldn't even get close. Caden said that Richardson guy has a mysterious background and is bad news. You can't mess with him. It seems I was right. He doesn't want you or the baby. But Olivia, we've known each other since childhood. I can't bear to see you fall to such depths. I'll give you a flat. I'll cover all expenses for you and the child from now on. Jasper, I know you. You wouldn't suddenly become so generous without reason. Tell me, what's your real motive? Olivia, I want you to stay by my side. He walked up to me and crouched down to meet my eyes. I want you to look at me the way you used to love me like before, to be with me forever. If you want to keep the child, I won't mind. As long as you stay with me. I looked at Jasper in front of me. Gone was his arrogance and conceit. At this moment, he looked as pitiful as a child begging for sweets. But my heart didn't stir even the slightest. Jasper. I lowered my gaze to him. That Olivia Robinson who loved you and wanted to be with you forever died in a foreign country 4 months ago. We can start over, Olivia. I swear I'll treat you well. But I don't like you anymore. Jasper, I don't have even a shred of affection left for you in my heart. You know me best. I don't even want to look at someone I don't like. The color drained from his face, but he still wouldn't give up. If not me, who else could you like? That irresponsible man who abandoned you and the child? Olivia, do you know how difficult it will be for a single mother with a child of unknown paternity? Difficult? I'm not afraid of death. Why would I fear hardship? So you still resent me for leaving you, don't you? What will it take for you to forgive me? He grabbed my hand, refusing to let go, his emotions growing more agitated. I didn't want to argue with him in the hospital. So I casually replied, then have Lorraine go through all the suffering I've been through. If I can do that, will you come back to me? I pushed him away and stood up, wrapping my coat tightly around me as I walked out. We'll see. How could Jasper bear to let Lorraine go through hell too? So after saying those words, I didn't give it another thought. After knowing him for so many years, every time Lorraine and I were at odds, I never won. Jasper always favored her. This time would likely be no different. But I had long since stopped feeling sad or heartbroken over such things. I received Mr. Richardson's call a week later, at dusk. I was taking a walk to aid digestion in the square outside the residential complex. There was a small fountain there, and a flock of pigeons had flown in from somewhere. As Dennis Richardson's deep voice sounded, the flock of pigeons took flight at that moment. The cooing of the pigeons echoed as the evening clouds were painted in a myriad of colors by the last rays of sunlight. I sat down on a bench, feeling inexplicably calm and peaceful. Miss Robinson, there's something I may need to trouble you with. Please go ahead, Mr. Richardson. I need to go away next month. There's a matter I must handle personally. Dennis Richardson continued in his unhurried tone. If I can return safely, I will keep my promise not to disturb you and the child's life. But if I don't come back, the child in your womb will be my only flesh and blood left in this world. So, Miss Robinson, are you willing to stay with the Richardson family with the child? I felt as if someone was tightly gripping my heart. In that moment when I could barely breathe, I suddenly blurted out, Mr. Richardson, is it something very dangerous? Don't be afraid. It's just some personal grudges. It won't involve you or the child. Also, I'm only asking for your opinion. If you're unwilling, Olivia, I still won't force you. Mr. Richardson, I have another checkup at the hospital tomorrow. There was a brief silence of 2 seconds on the other end of the phone. All right. I'm sorry to have disturbed you. So, Mr. Richardson, I might only be able to leave the day after tomorrow. Could you have someone come pick me up then? I heard a faint sound of the signal breaking up in my ear. In that sound, Dennis Richardson's breathing seemed to have lost its previous steadiness. I caressed my slightly swollen belly, my lips curling up slightly for some unknown reason. Is 10 a.m. the day after tomorrow okay? Yes, that's fine. Then it's settled, Olivia. All right, Mr. Richardson. It's settled then. It was 2 a.m. when he ended the call. A chilling wind blew, carrying with it the pungent scent of blood. It also pulled him back to reality from that rare moment of tenderness. Dennis Richardson put away his phone. The gentle expression he wore during the call had long since vanished. He descended the steps unhurriedly, approaching the man kneeling before him, trembling like a leaf. In the man's line of sight appeared a pair of gleaming leather shoes. But those exorbitantly expensive shoes were now spattered with blood. Terrified, he prostrated himself even lower, his forehead touching the ground as he begged repeatedly. "Mr. Richardson, please spare me this once. I won't dare do it again." His chin was suddenly lifted by the toe of a shoe. The man raised his eyes, his face deathly pale and quivering. Under the cold moonlight, Dennis Richardson's eyes were even more detached than the lunar glow. "I've said before, those who follow me are not to touch what they shouldn't. No one is allowed to." "Mr. Richardson. Johnson, not only did you touch it, your men also injured 3 police officers. Mr. Richardson, I beg you. I'll never dare again, I swear. I'll cut off my own arm to swear to you. It's too late. Kristen, take him to the police station. Mr. Richardson." The man was shocked. For his crimes, being sent to the police station meant certain death. "Think of your wife and children." The man fell silent immediately. Dennis Richardson walked out of the courtyard. Someone handed him a warm towel. He meticulously wiped his hands. As he bent to enter the car, his tone remained even. "Clean this place up thoroughly. She's coming the day after tomorrow. I don't want to frighten her." Dennis Richardson's estate was enormous. The numerous gardens displayed a myriad of styles, offering different sceneries throughout the 4 seasons. It was winter now, yet the gardens were still in full bloom. The white buildings were scattered tastefully across the grounds. He led me to the main residence, which was still located in Building 1. The master suite, occupying the entire 2nd floor, remained arranged as it had been that night. The moment we entered, I felt my face flush slightly. Dennis took my suitcase and dismissed the maid. "You should rest a bit, then freshen up. I'll unpack for you," he said. "Mr. Richardson, I can do it myself. You're pregnant. It's tiring enough for you." Dennis held my hand and led me to sit on the sofa. I watched as he opened the suitcase and began organizing the contents. The outerwear and some personal items were manageable enough. But when he started sorting my undergarments, I finally couldn't sit still any longer. "Mr. Richardson." I stood up, unusually nimble for my pregnant state. I snatched my underwear from his large hands. Perhaps due to how red my face had become, Dennis didn't insist further. I quickly organized my undergarments. I hadn't even noticed that Dennis's own intimate apparel was in that drawer as well. While I was in the bathroom freshening up, I was naturally unaware that Dennis stood in the enormous walk-in closet for a long time. Then, gazing at the vibrant colors amidst the black, white, and gray in the wardrobe, his eyes gradually filled with a smile. I knew very little about Dennis Richardson. From my perspective, he seemed to be a man of excellent background who had built a successful and respectable business. So at first, I didn't take the things he said on the phone too seriously. Until I accidentally heard from Kristen that he was going to Mexico this time. The people he was going to deal with were the most vicious and evil sort. Those people did something they absolutely shouldn't have behind Mr. Richardson's back. Now the boss needs to clean up the mess and get out cleanly. It's going to be extremely troublesome and dangerous. But Miss Robinson, you're truly our boss's lucky star. You're carrying his child. That's the best thing that could have happened. If something really goes wrong, at least our boss will have left behind an heir." Kristen started crying as she spoke. Watching her cry made me feel awful too, and I found myself tearing up without realizing it. Dennis happened to return just then. Seeing that Kristen had made me cry, he got angry, which was rare for him. "Don't scold him," I said, tugging on Dennis's sleeve and looking up at him with red eyes. "Mr. Richardson, will you stay with me and the baby tonight?" For the first few days after I arrived here, I had been sleeping alone in the master bedroom on the 2nd floor. Dennis was staying in the guest room. To be honest, we had only met briefly a few times. Although we had been intimate and now had a child on the way, we barely knew each other when it came down to it. So when Dennis, wearing his dressing gown, took me in his arms, my body was still somewhat stiff. But he simply brushed the hair from my forehead, kissed me between the eyebrows, and made no other uncomfortable moves. In the darkness, I took his hand and placed it on my belly. "Mr. Richardson, feel the baby." His breathing softened for a moment before returning to its previous rhythm. His palm was dry and warm as it gently caressed my swollen belly. I gradually began to feel sleepy. "Olivia." Just as I was about to drift off, Dennis suddenly pressed a kiss to the corner of my mouth. "I'm sorry, Olivia." I was too tired at the time to ask why he said that. And later, until he left, I forgot to ask about it. It wasn't until much later, when our child was almost ready to start primary school, that he finally revealed the truth to me after getting drunk one night. There are no such things as so many coincidences and accidents in this world. It was simply a matter of someone with intent paving the way step by step for the person they cared about. The night before Dennis Richardson left for Mexico, he still stayed in the master bedroom. By that time, I was almost 5 months pregnant. Perhaps due to a relaxed state of mind and careful daily care, my previously depleted body had largely recovered. I had put on weight on both my face and body, starting to look somewhat like a pregnant woman. In fact, I could sense Dennis's struggle these days. He was, after all, in his prime years and physically strong. As for me, even though I was pregnant, my figure hadn't changed much. Instead, my skin had become more hydrated and radiant due to proper care. I was prone to sleeping during pregnancy, but occasionally I could hazily hear Dennis getting up in the middle of the night to use the bathroom. So that night, when he kissed me and said good night as usual, I responded and embraced him. No one knew that I often had a dream. In the dream, it wasn't those few months of difficult struggles. Instead, it was often the moment when we first met. I was desperately struggling, shouting for help in Chinese. He had the only familiar face in the crowd, surrounded by numerous people. I didn't really have hope, as a lifeline often doesn't truly save lives. But he stopped, turned back, and looked at the disheveled me. Then, he said something to those beside him. Soon, the people grabbing me let go in fear. As I was tightly hugging myself, trying desperately to cover my body under torn clothes, a heavy men's coat fell on my shoulders, enveloping me entirely. Then, he reached out his hand to me. That hand was long and strong, with a string of sandalwood beads around the wrist. At that moment, I thought I had encountered a kind-hearted god. "Olivia, don't tease me." Dennis Richardson caught my hand. "Why not?" I asked. Dennis chuckled softly, kissing my fingertips. "You know why. It's been almost 5 months. The doctor said it's okay." Summoning my courage, I looked into his eyes. "Or, do you not want to? I'm afraid of hurting you and the baby." His palm rested on my belly as he sighed. "Go to sleep, darling." I finally averted my gaze, pressing my burning cheek against his chest. "Mr. Richardson, the doctor said it's fine as long as we're not too vigorous." After I spoke, he didn't respond, but I could feel his arm around me tensing like stone. I bit my lip and turned over in his embrace. I looked it up online. This position won't put pressure on the belly. Olivia Robinson. Hot kisses rained down on the nape of my neck and shoulders. Dennis's voice grew hoarse. "Who taught you to tempt a man like this? There's lots of info online." He lowered his head, placing a tender kiss by my ear. "Tell me if you're uncomfortable. Would you stop if I told you?" I don't know where I found the courage to say that. Nor did I realize I had such a mischievous side. But as soon as the words left my mouth, I curled up like a quail, regretting it. Dennis held me tightly from behind. His voice rough in my ear, he said, "No. But Olivia, I'll be even gentler." Heavens. He probably didn't know that long ago, I had already unknowingly fallen for his gentleness. 2 weeks after Dennis Richardson left, I went out to clear my head. Unexpectedly, I ran into Lorraine Johnson. When she saw me, she suddenly dropped her usual haughty demeanor. Grabbing my hand, she begged me to save her and send her back home. That's when I realized that what Jasper Ainsworth had promised me at the hospital earlier wasn't just empty words. However, I wondered if Lorraine's relative here, who had some influence, couldn't protect her? Later, Kristen told me that Lorraine's cousin, Albert Johnson, had been sentenced to death. Olivia, I'm begging you. Lorraine knelt on the ground, clinging to my legs, pleading once again. I looked down at her. With Albert Johnson in prison, how could Lorraine's life be any good? She had been abandoned by Jasper Ainsworth in this foreign country, just as I had been before. Unfortunately, she didn't have the same luck as I did to meet Mr. Richardson. Kristen wanted to drive her away, but as I stroked my swollen belly, I thought to myself that while Lorraine was bad, she didn't deserve to die. When she had made that request to Jasper Ainsworth back then, she had played a part in fanning the flames. But if there was anyone to blame, Jasper Ainsworth was the one who deserved the most resentment. I'd consider this a good deed for the sake of my unborn child and its father. Even if Dennis Richardson had lied to me about some things, I still just wanted him to return safely. Besides, I didn't want to be a young, wealthy widow. Kristen, call her family, I said. I glanced at Lorraine. She seemed to have suffered quite a shock. Her mental state appeared to be somewhat unstable. She's getting off easy, Kristen remarked. I smiled, not really. I beckoned Kristen over and whispered a few words to her. A few days later, Lorraine's family back home received news about her. For £1 million, their daughter could safely return home. At the same time, the Johnson family learned that it was Jasper Ainsworth who had abandoned Lorraine abroad. The Johnsons and the Ainsworths got into a heated dispute, leaving Jasper Ainsworth overwhelmed and struggling to cope. After Lorraine returned, the Johnson family used the excuse of her tarnished reputation to force Jasper Ainsworth to marry her. It was said that from the wedding day onwards, the couple was extremely unhappy. And Jasper Ainsworth even became physically abusive towards Lorraine. The Johnsons, of course, wouldn't let it go, and both sides ended up in a brawl. After the marriage, their life together was tumultuous. The woman who was once the apple of his eye, the unattainable goddess, later became the person he hated and despised the most. Jasper Ainsworth took to drinking heavily every day, and when he came home drunk, he would argue with Lorraine. Hitting her became a regular occurrence. But that's a story for another time. It had nothing to do with me anymore. Oh, and that £1 million? I donated it all to children's charities and orphanages. Dennis said he would definitely be back before I gave birth when he left. However, even up to a week before my due date, there was still no news from him. The last time I received a message from him was already 7 days ago. The atmosphere in the mansion was gradually becoming tense. Even I had heard several unfavorable rumors multiple times. After some consideration, I called Kristen over. We thoroughly investigated all the servants in the mansion one by one. Those who were restless and had wandering hearts were sent far away. Then we closed the doors tightly, not allowing anyone in or out. 3 days before my due date, there was still no news from Dennis. Kristen could no longer sit still and insisted on going to Mexico. I was also on the verge of breaking down. A person about to give birth was becoming thinner with each passing day. Kristen, you should go. No matter what, whether he's dead or alive, I need a definite answer. But Kristen was forcibly kept here by Dennis. He had ventured into danger but was still most worried about me. He left his most trusted subordinate at home. But Miss Robinson. Kristen was torn. Otherwise, let me send you back to England first. It's no longer safe here. Naturally, Dennis was the most important to him. But I was also carrying Dennis's child. Moreover, because there had been no news from Dennis for a long time, his enemies were all waiting for an opportunity to strike. Just the other day, Kristen and his men had caught several strangers with hidden guns outside the mansion. Kristen, I'm not going back to England. The baby and I will wait for him here. Miss Robinson, you go. I can manage on my own. I smiled at him, just like I did when facing Jasper Ainsworth that day. I also extended my hand to Kristen. Look, Olivia Robinson can't be knocked down. She can endure any hardship and isn't afraid of anything. Kristen looked at my hand that hadn't recovered to its original state even after a long time of healing. Tears rolled down his face. I'm not leaving. I'll listen to Mr. Richardson and protect you and his child well. I wanted to persuade him to go find Dennis. Perhaps now it just needed his strength to turn the tide for Dennis. But before I could speak, a sudden pain gripped my abdomen. The intense contractions left me unable to utter another word. As I was about to pass out from the pain, only one thought remained in my mind. I couldn't hold on until Dennis returned. I couldn't hold on for him to accompany me during childbirth. When he left, he asked if I was afraid. I said I wasn't afraid of anything. But actually, I was really scared. Scared of pain, of suffering, of being beaten and scolded, of hunger and cold. Also scared of the cut during childbirth. So, Dennis, if only you were here. If only you were here, how wonderful would that be? Kristen and the servant took me to the hospital. Just as I was wheeled into the delivery room, before the nurse could close the door, a strong hand suddenly pushed it open forcefully. Olivia. As I lay on the delivery bed, slipping into unconsciousness, I vaguely heard Dennis Richardson's voice. I tried desperately to open my eyes to confirm it was him returning, but I had no strength at all. However, my hand was tightly grasped by a large, warm hand. The temperature and pressure were so familiar to me. In an instant, I felt at ease. Olivia. Dennis leaned down and gently kissed me. I'm back, Olivia. The delivery process went fairly smoothly. The doctor said my physical indicators were very good, fully meeting the criteria for a natural birth. And with a natural birth, the pain would subside quickly afterwards, without having to endure days of suffering from a C-section. But Dennis was clearly frightened. Although he was asked to leave midway through the delivery because his extreme nervousness was affecting the doctor's work. And when I cried in the delivery room, Dennis stood outside the door and shed tears too. Kristen was shocked when she saw it. Dennis sternly ordered her not to tell anyone, but as soon as I left the delivery room, Kristen secretly told me. I couldn't help but smile thinking of that scene, but as I smiled, I started crying again. No matter how much one can endure hardships or is willing to suffer, who doesn't want to be loved and cherished? Not long after I gave birth, Dennis scheduled a surgery. Dennis's grandmother was still somewhat reluctant. But with her old-fashioned views, looking at her great-grandson in her arms, she was satisfied and didn't try to dissuade him further. When Dennis returned this time, he was injured. The period he had been out of contact was also due to his severe injuries. I didn't say anything, but when the baby was 3 months old and my body had fully recovered, I asked Dennis to accompany me to a temple. He doesn't believe in Buddha, but I do. I only pray that the Bodhisattva will see my sincerity and bless him too. As we knelt before Buddha holding incense, Dennis suddenly said to me, Olivia, you don't know how many sins I've committed. He had deliberately switched the medicine, and the power outage at the hospital caused by the explosion was on his orders. Later, he had tricked her into leaving China to come to his side. He doesn't believe in Buddha. He's not afraid of the Bodhisattva's blame, he's only afraid that she will fear him and distance herself from him. He's only afraid that his greed for her cannot be forgiven. I glanced at him and handed him the incense. Then you also don't know how merciful and miraculous the Bodhisattva here is. Dennis took the incense and watched me kneel down devoutly. He finally learned from my example and knelt down beside me. I looked up at the Bodhisattva piously. Dennis, however, kept turning to look at me. Long ago, neither of us knew. That one glance back then had already determined our fate for this lifetime.